Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Severance Season 2 Episode 10. It's called Cold Harbor. So spoilers for the episode, as always. It's the season finale, of course. Lots of expectations going in. Lots of things to hopefully be answered and payoffs to have. And it was a long 75-minute episode. In fact, with the extra stuff at the end and the pre-roll stuff that they add on to it, it was like 85 minutes. So it looked quite scary runtime-wise. But it's a good episode. I'll start off by saying that. It's a pretty great episode for the most part, with a lot of satisfying character moments, which is always my favourite thing in this show, is the character moments, and particularly how the science fiction of the concept helps the character moments be unique, be genuine, and be something truly different to what you can do in a normal show. And I think on that front, this episode delivered. There's a couple of little things I wasn't in love with, and most of it was just kind of stemming from things that I already didn't like very much. For example, having like the goat lady be back and have her like having this sort of pivotal moment in the whole thing. There's also a couple of moments where I felt like the weirdness of how Lumen do things felt like it was just turned up to 11 for the sake of going weirder for the finale, even though I don't know if it necessarily made, complete sense in the moment, even though good things do come out of it. I guess the big thing is that I kind of felt like they were, I don't want to call it fan service, but they found a way to have Milkchick dance again. And I couldn't help but feel in that moment that they were only doing that because in season 1, the dance scene that he had kind of blew up and became this meme thing. There was gifs of it everywhere. It felt like, we're returning to him dancing. We're going to do the same low-angle shot as he's dancing. He's got a marching band behind him this time. It's the same thing, but turned up to 11. There was a little moment during that where I got a touch cynical. It took me out of the episode, and I was thinking about why they decided to do this rather than being wrapped up in what they were doing on screen. So, a couple of little moments like that, but for the most part, very, very good. I guess like what people might be disappointed in is kind of the answer to what Cold Harbor seems to have been actually doing. Because even I was like giving wild theories about what it was, and it ends up being a little simpler, at least from the implications we get here. But to go through kind of, I think that honestly this episode breaks down into 2 segments, effectively. Not that there's not a lot going on in those 2 segments, especially the second one, which is the majority of the episode. But you've got the first part at the birthing cabin, where we have Mark talk to Devon and Cobell, but more importantly, he gets to talk to himself using a video camera and sending messages to each other and like going in and outside to record messages for each other. We get to see the innie and outie versions of Mark have a conversation. They get to communicate, and that's actually a really big deal because they don't really get to do that. The briefest slither we ever really had of that was when Helena had made that video responding to her innie when she was wanting to leave back in season 1, and that was kind of in this like official capacity. And effectively, Dylan gets the same thing this episode, only it's in written form. Although that ends up being a lot more sweeter than the one that Helena made for her innie. But this being able to communicate felt like a big deal in the moment. And one of the things that I really want to compliment here is the choice of how they had Mark react to seeing his outie on the the camera on the little the monitor. When he saw it and the way he kind of got emotional seeing his outie self, I actually thought was a really beautiful little thing. That it never really occurred to me just how impactful it would be to see himself. And it's interesting comparing it to outie Mark's reaction when he then plays back the message that any Mark makes, and he just kind of like goes, whoa, holy shit. For him it's less emotional, and it's more just kind of disbelief and like almost that this is kind of cool reaction, as opposed to the raw emotion of any Mark. And I think that makes sense, because for outie Mark, he's lived his whole life, and any Mark's kind of this like weird thing that he's been doing for a couple of years. And it's wild that he doesn't remember recording this other side of the message. But for any Mark, like the outside world, the idea that there's an outside life, like it's something they've always speculated about when they're on the inside. So of course it's a big deal to him you know, like even just seeing this evidence of the outside world, and that's kind of a running thing here. You know, Helly in a lot of ways got to experience who her outie was at the end of season 1, and that's been a driving force this season for her character and her outie character, honestly. But in this episode, the Marks get to speak to each other, and in a sense, so do the Dylans, where he reads the letter, and that's something we'll get to. But I thought this was a really well done moment between both versions, and it did the smart thing where the first couple of messages, it just played them as is, whereas, you know, like we just watched the reaction of one watching the other one on the camera, and then we do it again with the other, with the outie. But then when they start recording more and more messages, it starts to do some smart things with the editing, where it'll like start cutting between them as if they're almost having a conversation live. And they're not, obviously. They're doing this thing where they're going back and forth, recording things. But to make it more interesting to us visually as the audience, as we're watching, to make it feel like it flows a bit quicker and a bit more fluid, we get this thing. And what's so good about it is that it does kind of take a bit of a darker turn, where Any Mark almost kind of becomes a little bit of a villain in the scene. Not that he's not sympathetic, you don't understand where he's coming from, but it does kind of feel like all these goals all season have been about getting to Gemma, trying to save her, and now Any Mark's like, but wait a minute, if I get her out and we leave Lumen and this helps bring Lumen to the ground, then what happens to me? What happens to all the Ennies? And he actually says that first to Devon before he even starts talking to the other Mark. And Devon just like doesn't understand it first until Any Mark kind of explains it a bit better, and she just kind of doesn't know what to say. This idea that, oh yeah, like you effectively won't exist anymore. Now, of course, Outie Mark tries to tell him about reintegration and says that's something that's going to be happening. But you know, Any Mark starts to question if he's even telling the truth, and starts to question how much Outie Mark really cares about what's going on. Outie Mark doesn't do well for himself when he kind of, you know, he gets and this is a beautiful callback actually. So he gets Helly's name wrong, right? He says, hey, I heard that you kind of like someone down there, Helena Egan, although you call her well, I don't remember the fake name. Well, he got it wrong. He didn't say Helly, he said Helene, I think he said. I don't know. It wasn't Helena, because that's the real name, the outie name. But he didn't quite get the any name right. But either way, he said the wrong name. And Any Mark gets pissed off at this and corrects him. Like, despite whatever, like, Outie Mark asks a question at the end of his message, and Any Mark ignores it and says, her name is Helly. Helly R. This is a great callback, because if you recall, in that fantastic scene in, I think, episode 5 or 6, the one where Helena went to see Outie Mark at the restaurant, and she got Gemma's name wrong, wonderful callback, wonderful like flip of that, where Outie Mark has now done that to Any Mark, and you realize quite quickly that they are very much in a lot of ways two separate people, right? And this promise of reintegrating, because even that doesn't sound good to Any Mark, because he's worried that, yeah, but I've only been around for a couple of years, like, surely this version of us that combine will still be like way more of you than it is of me. I'm such a small percentage of those memories. And Outie Mark doesn't really have an answer for it. He just says he doesn't think that's how it works, but he doesn't have an answer when he says, how does it work then? How do I get to ever exist? Like, what exactly happens here? So, yeah, all this debate was fascinating, and it was kind of making me think, oh, where's this going to go? Are we pivoting here right in the final episode where Any Mark doesn't want to work with Outie Mark to save Gemma because it means that he'll lose what life he has and what look at his own love, right? And there's a great thing it does at the end, actually, to kind of like solidify that his love for Helly is equal to Outie Mark's love for Gemma, and I'll point that out. But I really like loved this exploration of this, and it's actually Cobell who talks to Any Mark and just flat out tells him what he's been doing with the numbers, and that everything he feels when he's looking at them are tempers. And each file that he has finished has been for a different persona, a different Any for Gemma. And he's like, wait a minute, I've done 24 of these things. So we have a hard number. Cold Harbor is going to be the 25th Any that Gemma has. And when they're done, they'll have completed it. And she doesn't quite say exactly what it's for here in this scene, but makes it clear that they will kill her. And it also makes it clear that like they'll have no purpose for you anymore either. So they might not do anything bad to you, but you won't be an innie anymore. Like your innie will cease to exist because there'll be no work to go to. Like you'll be disregarded. So you refusing to help save Gemma because you're worried that, oh, I don't get to live anymore is almost irrelevant because you're going to not live anymore anyway because the innies won't exist anymore. So that kind of seems to not completely convince him. It's actually, in a beautiful way, it's Helly when he goes into the workplace. But he does, he gets mad at both Cobell and Devon and tells them that if the next thing he sees isn't the severed floor, he basically, I can't remember even what he says, but he threatens whatever, and they're like, okay, we have to kind of like adhere to that. So we get this great transition where we go from him walking out the door to being in the elevator at the Severance building. It's a beautiful transition because we don't see what happens in the outside world between then and there, but it makes sense that from his perspective, he just goes from there to the building. And there's a mural on the wall that has all of the characters on it. Natalie's on there, even Devon's husband's on there. It's a whole thing. They're really going for this whole Mark is our Jesus because he's finishing the Cold Harbor project. And I have to tell you, the moment where I lost it in a good way is when the file was complete and the Alan Parsons project music started playing. And I did like that. I did pop for that. I do think they were overdoing it a little bit though with the dramatic lighting the entire time. Even before he finished and they were sitting there kind of in the dark with just like one spotlight on the desks. That was a bit much for me. The marching band coming in was a bit much. It is interesting Milchick still kind of like throwing jabs at the Kier robot or the puppet that's there, the animatronic that's doing like a presentation because they want Kier to witness this glorious final moment. I don't even know what to say about some of this. I do appreciate that the marching band's a different department, and I do think it plays into some things. I kind of like what it hits at by the end of their inclusion in this episode, but when they came in and Milchick started dancing with them and all that, I was feeling like, okay, right, you're being a little up your own ass right now, but you know, whatever. Like, obviously he's trying to get away to go find Gemma. And that was the other fun part about the opening segment, is that when they started talking about the plan to save Gemma, like, Cobell spells it out that, okay, you have to find this elevator, which, by the way, she had a bit of a look in her face when Innie Mark knew that this hallway with the red elevator door existed. Like, she's like, wait, Irving, what? Very curious. It feels like there's more to answer there, with, like, how Irving knew some of this stuff. Is it possible that Irving was like a failed Gemma? That he was down there before? Is like, because Gemma, I assume, isn't the first person they've tried doing this like test with, right? And they've been failures. It's just that Gemma's going to succeed seemingly because it's the perfect match and because they've got Mark doing all the data or whatever. But regardless, Cobell is like the look at her face, like she's definitely a little surprised to hear that they already have an indication that this hallway even exists. But she explains that, okay, you're going to have to go find the elevator, but when you go down, you're going to switch to Outie Mark. So Outie Mark is going to have to take over at that point. So I really love the idea that they've got this like heist rescue mission planned, and that because of the way the severance process works, and because certain elevators and doors will trigger the switch, both Innie and Outie Mark have to be like prepared. They both have to be in on it and know what their part of the plan is. And that's really fun. That's really fascinating. It's really different. Really, like, even just the tease of that earlier on. And then obviously later when we get the actual switch that happens when he goes down the elevator. Because Innie Mark's in a bit of a predicament when he goes down the elevator. And it leads to the death of one Mr. Drummond, who the bolt gun goes into his neck. Because when Mark severs to Outie Mark, he just kind of instinctively jolts and unintentionally kills Mr. Drummond. But Mr. Drummond was a dick, so I'm not feeling too sad about it, frankly. Okay, before I get into the rest of the Gemma Mark stuff, let me just pause here for a second and talk about Dylan. Because Dylan shows back up. Which, by the way, when Milkshake gives him like the file, like the response to his request to leave, turns out he can't just quit, but he requested to leave in the same way that Helly kind of requested to leave in season 1. When he gives him the response in file form, he says he's busy today and he has to leave, or well, he says that before he hands it to him. But after he hands him the file, Milkshake bolts out of that room, and obviously it's because he's got somewhere else to be, and he's almost a little bit late because he comes in a little bit late for his little comedy bit with the puppet. But it almost played like Milkshake was scared of the emotions that Dylan might have because of whatever he's about to read in this response. I thought that was funny. But yeah, Dylan gets this letter from his outie. And this, I thought, was a very, very sweet scene. In a lot of ways. Because in the very same episode that we've got Any Mark starting to kind of doubt Outie Mark and like, hey, you don't seem like a bad guy per se, but I don't think you actually care about me so much. You care more about saving your wife and I'll be forgotten about after. Now, Outie Mark does say, I won't abandon you, I promise. In fact, hell, the first thing he does is apologize to Any Mark for even existing. He's like, hey, I created you and put you in a prison by agreeing to do this severance thing. That's on me, and he apologizes for that. And that's kind of an interesting, sweet moment as well, because, yeah, like, he made that choice. And it's almost like Outie Mark is finally rectifying with why he made that choice. He admits that he tried to pretend that Gemma didn't exist. It was the only way he could get through things. And that by creating this Any version that didn't remember her, he thought that was some kind of solution, and he's admitting now that that wasn't the case. And that's something way back when we found out he had a dead wife back in the early season 1. That was like that really good motivation for him to do it in the first place. And having him admit kind of the consequences of that now, I think are quite interesting. Obviously, the context has changed quite a bit because now he knows she's alive, but it doesn't really matter. That core idea is still there. But yeah, so Dylan reads this letter from his outie, and the first point is he tells him, F you, Gretchen's my wife. How dare you? Something to that effect. And it felt very Dylan. It felt like, it sounded like Dylan speaking, right? And we see obviously some shots of outie Dylan writing the letter and looking over at his wife and kids. But he has 2 more points, though. And the other 2 points kind of amount to, like, when she told me that you were this kind of, like, I think he even said badass. I mean, that was maybe a bit of a stretch on his part, but that he was willing to try and fight for what he wanted, and that, his wife felt a certain way. Yeah, it pissed him off, but it kind of pissed him off because, it sounds a lot like Dylan, since that scene we got with the wife where he got mad when he found out about the kiss. It sounds like outie Dylan has done a lot of reflecting by the time he wrote this letter, where he's thought about why that upset him. Like, why did it upset me that my wife kissed another version of me? And he kind of admits that in some ways, like, he's never been like this, super like appealing guy or whatever. I actually thought he was going to go a different way for a second and say that, she must really like love me because she's fallen for 2 versions of me or something. He never actually says that, but I was sort of thinking he might go that way as he was writing. But he kind of says, hey, if you want to leave, if you want to quit the job, you've got the choice. I'll give you the choice. But I actually think the world's a bit better that you're there. And that he feels comforted knowing that there's this better version of himself that exists. And it's almost the complete polar opposite of Helly and Helena, where Helena, overcompensating and trying not to admit that Helly is who she really should be is, like the way she is, right? She's super cool. She's doing all this conniving stuff. Dylan, on the other hand, is recognizing that there's something good about this pure version of himself that exists as an innie, and is in some ways inspired that he's maybe even a little bit better because he's, and in the situation that he's in, he's been forced to kind of develop a different kind of confidence or a different kind of drive that outie Dylan never had to develop. And he kind of respects that. He kind of sees it as a way of, hey, maybe I've got some of you in me naturally and I just never was able to tap into it. It feels very healthy. It feels very therapeutic. And I think having Dylan, the character who gets angry and yells and he drops the sarcastic one-liners, having him be the one who's outie says, hey, you know what, like, you're actually a better part of me, and I'm actually kind of inspired a little bit by it. I think that's actually really sweet, and it's a really nice counterpoint to Helly and Helena, but also even what was going on with Mark and outie Mark in this episode. So yeah, I thought that was really good. I thought it really fit into the themes. I think it really made it feel like it belonged in the finale, and it's why Dylan's still in the finale. When I did, you know, I think I and many others were wondering if he was even going to be in the finale. Whereas Irving, clearly, yeah, he's not in the finale, and it feels like, yeah, there was no place for him to be in the finale if something wasn't going to directly tie into him. Whereas Dylan's stuff here thematically does link in, and then of course he does get a little involved by helping barricade Milchick in the bathroom when Helly makes her move so Mark can run away. He kind of comes in and helps save the day, and he gets that triumphant moment where towards the end of the episode when Milchick is finally like putting everything he's got into like breaking down the, it's not even the door at this point, it's the vending machine that Dylan's like put in place, which even that is beautifully poetic. Dylan was the one that cared the most about the vending machine. He talked a lot about the vending machine in season 1. So the idea he's using this like carrot they gave him, like the one thing he liked in the office was the vending machine in season 1. He's using that to fight back against the man, quote unquote, is kind of beautiful. But when Milchick finally knocks it down and he comes out and he almost jumps up onto the back of the, because it's knocked over, but he jumps up onto the back of the vending machine, almost like a super villain, right? Where he's sort of like surveying the room, and then we get that beautiful wide shot of Dylan and an army of a marching band behind him who all work for the company, and they're all united with him, and he says, F you, Mr. Milchick. Like, that was a really satisfying moment, and it, you know, obviously it follows on from Helly making a bit of a speech to them and saying, hey, we lost someone named Irving, he just disappeared, you've probably lost people too, you know, stop working for them and start fighting for us. And Helly had a great line of dialogue, actually, when she was making this speech, and Milchick was watching and listening. He was like peeking through the crack in the door / vending machine, where she said, you know, they only gave us half a life and never expected us to fight for it, but here they are fighting for it. And that line like made all of this part work for me. Like I was feeling so mixed about the marching band and the dancing, and I was kind of like, I don't know, but when it got to this, right, and this kind of sums up different parts of Severance for me, is sometimes I do think it goes into like, oh, we're going to be quirky and weird, probably a bit more than we should, just because we want to be even quirkier. But then it'll hit like a line like that, like a moment where like the core drama and science fiction idea and what it's talking about here, the work people are rising up, they want to rebel. And we see that as well with the goat lady, where she fights back against Mr. Drummond. She's sick of killing her goats for their stupid experiments, especially since it's all a bunch of, like, you know, Drummond says to her, like, oh, like, the goat has to be killed to guide the soul of whoever towards Kier or some bollocks. It's not even, like, it didn't even sound like they were using it in the experiment or it was, like, part of the scientific process. It just sounded like a ritual because they're Scientologists and witchcraft or something. I don't know. So yeah, I regardless, they only gave us half a life and expected that we wouldn't fight for it. There was just kind of like a power in that, and then the beautiful idea that she's really one of the family. She's one of the Egans, but the real her, and I'm going to call her that, the real her, Helly, is standing up and saying, no, we can't take this anymore. F them, let's fight back. And it does kind of leave us in a place where I'm curious what season 3 is going to be. It kind of feels like there's going to be kind of a revolt / coup / occupation of the Severance floor. And the ending also feeds into that as well with the main stuff. But I like this also felt like it was really feeding into that. This idea that Dylan's willing to fight back, Helly's inspiring and becoming a leader, which actually, perfect time to go back and talk about the other part of the opening, which I hadn't mentioned yet, which was Jamie Egan coming to talk to Helly and talking about, oh, you made a hell of a speech kind of thing. Which, by the way, I have to say, I had to turn on subtitles because every time Jamie Egan is on screen, he just, like, gravelly whispers every line of dialogue, and I can't hear half the things he's saying. So here's a complaint. I have to put subtitles on to see what he's saying, because I just cannot hear half of it. But he says, I was very upset. I threw a tin of candy, or there was like a weird phrase like that. To which Helly responds, "You're really effing weird," which was a really good response. And it's so good because that scene we got last episode at the breakfast table, where he said something like, "Oh, I wish you'd have them raw." Like that Helena should have said, "You're really effing weird," but she didn't. She doesn't talk back to him. But Helly will talk back. And Jamie Egan is into that. He likes that. He's here to tell her that Helly, not Helena, but Helly, he can see Kieran. He can see the fire of Kier in her eyes. Which, obviously, she doesn't know how to take. It's such a weird thing to say. She almost stabs him with the pen, but she... which, that would have been definitely a turn of events. But again, that little like sort of knock-on payoff to that of like having him say something weird, but having Helly actually have the balls to say, "You're really weird. I'm not putting up with your shit." It's really good. And someone pointed out, because I talked about the eggs being split in two on the breakfast plate in that scene from last episode, and then someone pointed out in the comments that it was split into 6, and they said it was representing the 6 rooms or something that Gemma went into. I don't think that's true. Just because we only saw her go into 6, I was pretty sure that didn't mean there was only 6, and this episode kind of confirmed there was like 24, well, 25 including Cold Harbor. But it was a nice thought. What I did like about the comment, though, I think it was the same comment. Forgive me if it wasn't. Whoever said this, I'll give you credit for it. Helena only ate the outie of the egg. She only ate the white. She didn't eat the yolk. She only ate the outie. Because everything has to be segregated, and she's an outie. That was a really, like, the split into 6, I don't think was particularly meaningful, but the eating the outie only, that definitely, that's a good catch. I like that. Anyway, so Mark explains everything to Helly. They're all whispering hush hush, and Helly is like basically saying that he should do it, right? It's a very emotional little scene, but she's basically saying, "Hey, you should save her because it's the right thing to do, and do this whole reintegration thing because then you get to live," right? She's basically saying, "Hey, you can go have a real life, so go have a real life." She's basically giving him the all clear to abandon her in the nicest way possible. Obviously, it's, she's not saying it in that. I'm not. She didn't phrase it in any of these ways that I'm making it sound bad. It's more of like an emotional, like, "No, I need to let you go because it's the right thing to do," kind of talk. So, he finishes the project. They're all watching with bated breath at the computer, in the secret rooms and whatnot. And we get this whole thing that then develops into, distracting Milchick after the whole celebration thing, yada, yada, yada. Obviously, Mark can't get into the hallway without the right key card, so we get the fight with Drummond. I don't have too much to say on this in particular, but, obviously the goat lady helps him out and he gets down the elevator, and I mentioned the death of Drummond before. Right, so, talking about Gemma, though. So, what is Cold Harbor? So, it becomes clear, as Cobell was explaining it, and then we see what Cold Harbor is, that each of the rooms she was going into were all different variations that were based on her real experiences, right? Because we had the Christmas card one, where she hates writing Christmas cards, and we had the "I love you" without the response, which also happened. And we see that in this final Cold Harbor room, she's wearing the outfit she had the night she left Mark, and presumably died, quote unquote. And she has to take apart a crib, right? This is the final test. And we saw how emotionally devastating that was in that story episode, the flashback episode where we got to see all the backstory. And it seems like the goal here was to get to the point where they've completely erased and separated any from the real person. In the sense that they're basically looking at her readings and they're saying she's not feeling anything. She is taking apart a baby crib and she is not feeling a thing. The most traumatic thing that's ever happened in her life, and she is feeling nothing from it. They're basically perfecting the severance process. Maybe there's a little bit more to it than that, but like that was the main sort of gist of it. Like the idea being that like if you show a severed person something meaningful from the outside world, they will feel something for it. There'll be some kind of deja vu or some kind of like guttural feeling that they can't quite explain. So, of course, it's really put to the ultimate test though, because when Mark actually gets in there, and there's a whole thing where he uses the blood on the tie to get in from Drummond, and he's, you know, he sees the Cold Harbor sign, so he knows which door that he should probably go in. When he goes in though, she of course is kind of a blank slate. She doesn't know who this is. And the evil doctor is like saying, hey, don't talk to him. Don't trust him. He's here to hurt you. And he's like, hey, no, I'm your husband. I'm not going to hurt you. We have to go. It's a really big moment. And I think what's so interesting about the makeup of this and how everything that's been set up is that we know that the second she walks out the door of this room, she'll be her again. And it'll be a proper reunion. And I really thought for a minute here that they weren't going to give us that they were going to like say, no, Cold Harbor has worked. She is going to not trust him, and it's going to be tragic. And Mark's going to get, you know, dragged away by whoever, and we're not going to get the real reunion. He'll remember seeing her now. He knows she's alive, but they won't actually get the real reunion. But no, they do. Like, she does take his hand. This idea that there is still something there. She still wants to trust him somehow. And he takes her out into the hall, and she, you know, becomes Gemma again, and she immediately sees Mark, and it is this more loving thing where they smile at each other, and it's a whole thing, and she very quickly, because she's already tried to escape multiple times, is like, hey, we need to go, I know the way to the elevator, let's go. And she, you know, she runs, and the Severance building at this point literally goes into red alert from Star Trek, where all the hallways start flashing red lights going up and down the hallways. That gave me a chuckle as well, if I'm honest. In a good way. Like, I wasn't mad at that, but very over the top. So they get to the elevator and they start kissing in the elevator as well, which obviously we know they're both about to switch to different personalities. So all of a sudden, he's Any Mark and she's Miss Casey now. But at least Any Mark has context for what they're doing and why they're here. In fact, I got a good laugh as well, actually, when when Miss Casey just sort of looked at him for a minute after, like, because, you know, they became themselves when they were kissing, so they pull apart. Miss Casey's just staring at him, says, Marquess, what is taking place right now? that line did get me a little bit, because she really would be confused. But, you know, he runs down with her out of the hall. They go running down all the corridors, a bit of a maze as it is, and they're looking for that fire exit, basically, to get out. And they get to the door, and he's like, you have to go through. And she goes through, and she becomes Gemma again. And she turns around and looks in the window and sees Mark, and she's like, she's her. She's like, hey, Mark, come on, you have to come through. And just as he's about to go through the door, Helly walks in the background at the end of the hall. So we have Any Mark with Gemma right in front of him on the other side of this door, and behind him is Helly R. And this is really our big climax scene of the episode. It intercuts a little bit with the other stuff, but this is the big climax scene, really. This is so good. This is, like, for any little critiques I could have about this episode, and for, you know, any critiques I could have about one or two episodes this season that have been a little bit mixed, this is where the show excels, because it did such a good job of setting up this potential decision, both in this episode and indeed just throughout the entire season as a whole. Because now Any Mark is faced with this decision of leaving here, and he knows that if he walks out that door, he probably doesn't exist anymore. This is probably him ending his quote-unquote life, because simply, why would he ever come back? Why would Any Mark ever come back to this building? Why would he ever go to a severed location again? It wouldn't have to. It wouldn't make sense. But he has one good reason to as well as just wanting to live, and that's what he wants to live for. He wants to live with Helly. And he looks back up at her, and Gemma's begging at the door. And this is the other like sad part of this, is like Gemma has to kind of process that there's like something between these two. There's like one little moment where she sort of pauses and looks over at Helly and kind of maybe starts to kind of, you know, the gears are processing what she's seeing right here. And because I was expecting like Devon or someone to be on the other side of the door waiting. Like I was expecting, or Cobell or whoever, but I'm sure they're upstairs. Maybe when season 3 starts, we'll get like a little quick, like, here's what happened immediately afterwards where Gemma get away because they were waiting out in a car or something. But yeah, Any Mark makes the choice to turn away and go to Helly. And of course, Helly is heartwarmed by this decision. There is a little moment where she looks over at Gemma and maybe feels a little guilty there. But there is something to this. It's kind of a beautiful moment. But I think what's so good about this is the fact that we, the audience, like, I mean, I think all of us probably have somewhat like a decision where we would say this is technically the right thing he should do, and this is technically the wrong thing, you know, whatever way round you feel. But I don't think any audience member could say that we don't understand, given everything we have learned about this choice that he has. It's just simply the fact that he knows that like he'll never come back here, he'll never see Helly again. And the way he phrases it earlier in the episode when he's talking to Outie Mark is he specifically says, I'm trying to not lose the person I love. And I think Outie Mark is taken aback by that when he says love. Like, you know, like, I love someone and I don't want to lose it. You're talking about getting your wife back and the pain you felt from losing. I'm trying to avoid it from happening. I'm scared that I'm going to lose the person I want. So I think we as the audience feel empathy for both Any Mark and Outie Mark, but more importantly here, we care about both Helly and Gemma. And I think that's like the real genius part here, is that they had to nail that. Like the best episode of the season was that Gemma episode, and like it was crucial that it was up there as one of the best episodes. Because making it, if we did not like come to truly care about Gemma, if she was just the wife that needed saving and was just the MacGuffin for Mark, this moment would have had a very different feel and very different weight to it, if any weight, because we would have all just been rooting for him to go with Helly. Because Helly's the one we know, Helly's the one we care about. Regardless of who the outie is, we care about Helly because she's been so developed over the course of 2 seasons. But that Gemma episode does such a fantastic job of making you care about her, making you want her to be saved. And I think one of the interesting things about this, the way it ends here, with him running back into the building with Helly, presumably to have their occupation of the Severance floor, because, well, yeah, it's not like the company's going to let them just do whatever, so presumably them and all the other departments are going to sort of revolt and kind of try and stay in here because they want to stay alive, which is interesting just from, like, you know, does Gretchen, does Dylan's wife, like, try and, like, come in to communicate and say, hey, it's not fair that you've taken, like, your outside person's life away, because now they don't get to live at all until you come out. So that's an interesting thought in and of itself. But I do wonder, like, I remember thinking, oh, it's weird that they cast Lackman in such a small role relatively for Miss Casey. And then obviously it turned out she was more important, but she's still more important without a lot of screen time. In fact, she was mostly absent for the vast majority of this season. Until her episode, she was like brief glimpses, right? A face here, a little flash of her face there, and that was it. I genuinely wonder, like, the cool shift that might take place now, where Gemma is, like, one of the main characters, and she is the main character on the outside world. Like, if Mark in season 3 is just Any Mark, possibly reintegrating a little bit, although I don't know if he has to keep getting treatments for that to keep happening and develop, but if he is Any Mark for all of the season, or at least most of the season, until maybe some pivotal moment later on when he has to become Outie Mark for some reason, then we don't have Mark in both sides. We only have Any Mark, and we have Helly, and we have Dylan, and we have whoever characters we have down here. But we still have story on the outside to tell, and it's really fascinating to me to think of Gemma becoming the main character on the outside. I do wonder if she becomes, like, not necessarily equal to Mark as a main character. You know, it's a bit of an ensemble, but I think we'd all agree that Mark is the main character of Severance, right, as a whole. I do wonder if Gemma kind of becomes the co-lead and a potential season 3 where she's the one on the outside fighting to get her husband back, which is a nice reversal of Mark fighting to get her back throughout this season, and arguably even season 1, but certainly in season 2 that's been the case because he's known about her. That would be such a cool reversal of everything we've had so far, and just like having her work with Devin, and we know Devin loves her brother and cares about her brother, but also them having to come to terms with the fact that they'd be taking something away from this any version of Mark. And I think that's going to be the key thing for season 3, is we're going to really go down that rabbit hole of what rights the innies have, and if they're classed as separate lives, and that's what they're fighting for here. They're fighting for the right to keep living and to keep at least what they have. Because there's a really sad line that Innie Mark had earlier in the episode when he said to Outie Mark, like, yeah, we don't have much, but it's all we do have. And we still kind of want to try and keep it. And by the end of the episode, it feels like they're ready to fight to try and keep what little life they do have, which is kind of inspiring in some ways, but it also has this downside of their outies kind of don't get to exist, at least for a while, until this is resolved. Now, you do wonder, will there be a reason why the company can't just, like, turn the Severance stuff off? Like, can they not just, like, turn off the thing to make them all switch to their outies? That might be potentially what happens. Maybe that'll even happen between seasons. But given the way this ends, I almost kind of hope they don't do that right away, and there's maybe a reason why they can't, because I really want to see this status quo possibly play out a little bit in some way. So one of the details I mentioned that I was going to get to is something that sort of, like, from a filmmaking point of view, showed that Innie Mark was in love with Helly the same way that Outie Mark is with Gemma. And that's the fact that as they're skipping or running down the halls and it goes into slow motion or freeze frames at the end, a little bit cheesy, arguably. But the one detail that I did love is that it switched to film. And I pointed out in the Gemma episode that all of the flashbacks when they were in love and the relationship was blossoming and they were having all their big moments, that was in film. And it stood out as looking different to the rest of the show. It felt warmer, it felt more natural. And this had that feeling. And I think that was the direction, Ben Stiller directing the episode. I think that was his way of saying, hey, he is going through this with Helly right now. And he does love her as much as Outie Mark loves Gemma. And that is, like, the core conflict, perhaps, going forward. And I think certainly for me, it's more interesting than just them versus the company, right? Don't get me wrong. It was funny watching James Keir, go, oh, F, and, like, swear and stuff when he was watching Mark talk to Gemma and realizing that his whole big day was falling apart. Like, that was enjoying to watch. And sure, I'm sure there's some interesting stuff to learn still about the company and what they're doing. But that's not really what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the inner dynamics of these characters and the fact that I care about both Innie and Outie Mark. I care about both Gemma and Helly. And how do we find any way to resolve that? Because if they do reintegrate, if it becomes one Mark, then you can't have both relationships. So what do we do about that? That's interesting. Oh, pardon me. I was fighting that sneeze there for a minute. I should have probably just let it go when I first felt it. Anyway, so yeah, what do we do? Like, what do we do about that? And I think that's a really tough question to answer. And I think the debates from the innies to the outie world of saying, hey, we deserve to live, could be fascinating science fiction television. It could be fantastic. And I'm really excited about the potential for all that. But if I'm looking back at the season, yeah, there's some things where sometimes they just make things extra quirky, and I don't necessarily feel they need to be. Like, some of the celebration stuff in this episode's a bit more... because I think when it works is when it's a little bit quirky, and it's more like just, oh, they're doing that awkward thing where the companies try to pretend that they're doing something nice, and that we're a family here, so we're going to make you a banner saying congratulations. We've got a little informational cartoon explaining stuff. That all felt like, in a sense, quite grounded and to me, and that it felt like maybe it's a little heightened, but it feels very much on par with the type of things I expect a company to do in a very cynical way. I think sometimes, though, it goes a little bit further, than it needs to, and maybe is extra quirky just for the sake of saying, hey, look at how quirky we are. But, that's a fairly minor complaint. I do think the Cobell episode, I said it repeatedly as I talked about that episode. I said it in the following one. Could have been a 5-10 minute segment at the start of episode 9. We did not need to have this stretched out at 10 episodes. That episode suffered. And there's a couple of mixed little things here or there. I do think the Irving and Bert stuff was getting really interesting, and then very abruptly was just kind of tied off in a bow last episode. Not necessarily for good. I do think there's going to be more to those characters, possibly. But for the sake of this season, because they knew that they didn't really fit into the finale, it felt like we just had to kind of quickly do something with them to have them off the board for the final episode. And it does feel a little bit... That does feel a bit underwhelming to me for those characters. Miss Hong as well, like her plot wrapped up in episode 9. And it was fine, but it didn't... I guess it just didn't build to something like bigger like I thought it might. Obviously, there was the thematic connections to Milchick, which was nice. And I do love actually that, the final moment with Milchick and Dylan is Dylan standing up to Milchick, because Milchick's thing this whole season has been him being shat on by the uppers, right? And even the puppet, whoever's voicing the puppet Akir, gives him shit for being too verbose. And then Milchick, just last episode, like finally kind of snapped, started fighting back a little bit, standing up for himself. So it's a great irony that Dylan, who's been holding back and like being the good employee for Milchick because he's been getting rewards all season, him finally in his final moment of the season saying F you Milchick and standing up for himself, Milchick finding himself on the other side of that same kind of confrontation where he's the bad guy upper management who's not been treating them well, who's been doing whatever. I think is very poetic as well. There's a lot of poetic touches. There's a lot of scenes from earlier in the season that neatly kind of like get called back to in this finale. And I really like those moments for the most part, because they do feel smart. They do feel like they had all this stuff planned out for their finale, and they knew all these little things they wanted to set up. So in that realm, it's very good. But, I do think that there's a couple of weird steps in the season. I guess the way I would put it is that I think season 2 of Severance is less consistent than season 1. I think it has higher highs, but it also has lower lows. So it's a bit more up and down across the board of like just how good the show is being. But those highs are incredibly high. And even some of the episodes that aren't the best episodes have a lot of good stuff in them. There's only one outright that I would say is a complete dud. But there's a couple that are, not as amazing as the best ones of the season as well. So, it's definitely that kind of season, and that's okay. A lot of season 2s end up feeling like that. I do wonder if season 3 will continue to be as self-indulgent as perhaps season 2 got a little bit in places, or if it'll be refined. Because what I was thinking about towards the end, actually, about Mr. Robot, which is one of the best shows ever made, frankly. And that also did a thing where season 2 was a bit uneven, and it was a little self-indulgent. And the critiques were heard, and then season 3 and 4 were the best 2 seasons. Like, it was like lessons were learned from any missteps that were taken. Now, admittedly, I do think Mr. Robot season 1 is better than Severance season 1, right? I think Mr. Robot is phenomenal. Severance is great, right? It's one of the most interesting things on TV these last couple of years for sure. But I was thinking as I was watching this, if maybe we'll see a similar trajectory, or is it going to be a case of where it kind of always has this little thing on its shoulder of being like occasionally it gets a little too indulgent with its weirdness. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure not everyone feels that way. I just think that sometimes it just sort of dips into, oh, this will get the internet making memes. This will get the internet doing the GIFs. As opposed to it's the best choice for what we're doing here. Like, I think the Severance tone is at its best when it's just a slightly heightened version of real corporate, the corporate world, where it's just like, oh, it's the bright walls, it's that sterile office environment, and the pretending to be nice and like all the little things that you do in an office to try and make things feel better. When it starts getting a little too wacky with it, it starts to feel like it's going for, I don't know, like I say, the meme cred, I guess. So I don't know, but I'm trying to like process my feelings and be as honest as I can, even if like, because I'm mostly very positive. I think the core character stuff that happens in this episode is fantastic and is paying off things that have been set up all season. The wait for season 3 is going to be tough. It's going to be especially if it's going to be like 3 years again, because Jesus. Remember a time when TV shows used to come every year, seasonally? Remember that? That's why they're called seasons. Anyway. That's my thoughts on the Severance season 2 finale. It's very, very, very good. Great even, and has some phenomenal moments in it. Not my favorite episode of the season though. That's probably still the Gemma episode. But there's definitely like a good, like across the season, there's like a good dozen or so scenes that are like the 12 best scenes of the show. Like it's just like when it's firing, it is firing on all cylinders. So yeah. But let me know what you thought of the season finale of Severance in the comments. I'm sure I've glossed over some details that people would like to talk about and mention, so please do talk about those below. You can support all the content over at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. And of course, like, subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. Helps out a bunch. As far as TV shows, obviously I do some old shows ongoing, like Person of Interest, X-Files are the ones that are kind of ongoing just now, as well as the ones that I'm doing that are Patreon sponsored, like 80s Twilight Zone. Coming soon as far as new shows go, Last of Us Season 2 is pretty soon, so is Black Mirror Season 7, I'll be doing those. And I'll try occasionally new things as well. I think Apple's got another show starting in April that I may try. But thank you very much for joining me. It's always a pleasure. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?